Welcome to Behavioral Health in the New Normal, a podcast developed by Prestige Community Resources, aimed at bringing healing back to our community through knowledge, expert advice, and positive messaging. The show is a joint venture between the Department of Behavioral Health and Prestige Community Resources, funded by SAMHSA in response to the challenges currently impacting our communities. Hosted by Paul Wells Sr., who uses over 30 years of extensive clinical social work experience to conduct insightful interviews with experts and professionals on a wide range of topics that impact the Washington, D.C. community. From behavioral health crisis to education to financial hardship and anything in between. This show will provide information and insights that will surely make a difference in your life.
I want to welcome everyone back to the podcast series offered by Prestige Community Resources in conjunction with the Department of Behavioral Health in Washington, D.C. Family, I am so excited. We have a wonderful guest, an expert in our midst who's going to talk today about domestic violence. And we're going to focus about how the pandemic has influenced some of the new trends with domestic violence. But let me introduce you to the extraordinary Marsha Woodland. Miss Woodland, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm peaceful. You know, I want to let everyone know that you are a nationally recognized orator and trauma survivor who shows the world that trauma survivors can and do recover.
We do.
Yeah, we do. Listen, before we get into the meat of things, can you tell everybody where you're from and where you grew up and how you got into this domestic violence niche and where did it all start?
Well, I'm from Waldorf, Maryland. I grew up in the DMV in some of the most economically depressed neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. I've lived in various wards in the city. And right now I live in Prince George's County, but of course my heart is in D.C.
That's right. Okay. And did you go to school here in DMV in Waldorf? You went to school in Waldorf?
I went to school in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Yeah. And the way that I came to be a part of the domestic violence movement is I was a victim first, survivor second, an advocate third.
Okay. Very good. I want to hear a little more about that, but why don't we, for the audience benefit, can you define and describe what exactly is domestic violence? People have different ideas of what it is. What is domestic violence?
Well, domestic violence, sometimes referred to as intimate partner violence, and some people mistakenly call it family violence. It's a form of violence where the offender exerts power and control over the victim, and that could be emotionally, economically, physically, or sexually.
Okay. And the perpetrator could be male or female.
Absolutely. And the victim can be male or female.
Right. And it could be of any age range. It could be a younger couple or union. It could be an older couple. And so does domestic violence always include a physical component? Does it always have to be physical to be defined domestic violence?
Not at all.
Okay. So verbal abuse, emotional abuse is a part of the portfolio of domestic violence.
It is.
Yeah. What are some of the long-standing impacts that domestic violence has on the victim?
Fear, anxiety, distrust, shame, guilt, depression. They question their judgment.
That's right.
And then with all of that comes the physical health issues and disparities as well.
Yeah, so accurately said. You know, I've had enough encounters with victims and perpetrators, but from the victim stance, I've seen many times that the victim of domestic violence has a real difficult time leaving the relationship in some instances. What would lend itself for someone to stay in a domestic violence situation?
Well, many times there are social factors that impact a victim's reasoning for staying. But if I'm financially dependent upon my abuser or offender, I mean, we're quick to tell people to leave. from the place that the victim stands, leave and do what? Right. Leave and go where? You know, sometimes I stay because I know that I cannot provide for the children. Sometimes I stay because I really don't know any better. Right. If I came from a family where violence in the home was the norm, then nothing is out of order. You know, I don't think I deserve any better. Or I believe if I could just do what he said, then I won't set him off. Right. If we're gonna ask someone to leave, we need to have something to put in place of them leaving.
That's right.
You know?
That's right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Because in many cases, the victim is dependent on the perpetrator, the resources, and I can imagine how daunting it must be to leave that to an unknown. Where do I go from here, and how do I protect my children? And wow. Now, did I hear you correctly when you said that the women can be perpetrators of domestic violence against men? We don't hear that too often.
Yeah, but it's true. And the reason why we don't hear it so often is because of, you know, sexism and stereotypes. Men are less likely to report domestic violence than women are.
Yes. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And when they do report it, I would imagine it's really difficult.
Yeah.
You know, because of the stereotype.
Now, we know the pandemic, I'm sure, has influenced in some way. What has been the impact of the pandemic on domestic violence trends? And what does the data say? Data on domestic violence, it's tight-lipped. Mm-hmm. And I believe it's for funding purposes, political purposes, and things of that nature. That's not information you will be able to just go and easily find. Okay. You have to dig for the data. Okay. However, the way the pandemic with domestic violence is a pandemic within a pandemic. Mm. That's what some experts are saying. Yeah. And ironically, instead of the numbers going up as far as calls, they're actually going down. Mm. And that's not to say that instances of domestic violence have gone down. The opportunity, the availability, and the safety of being able to reach out and call to ask for help or resources or for education. Victims don't have that opportunity right now because they're sheltering in place with their offenders, some of them. So, yeah, calls are going down. In some cases, they're almost like a hostage to the situation. There really is no exit. The resources aren't readily available. And we already know that's just across all systems. Just trying to access resources has been very difficult because of the pandemic, and you know, it limits how many people can get access and the resources available. That's interesting that the reports of domestic violence or the requests for support have decreased during the pandemic. I never would have even thought that. What can we do?
I think if I had to pick one thing, it would be to effectively safety plan with victims, people who are already in the system for domestic violence. Mm-hmm, of course, we want to prevent domestic violence from occurring ever, but for people who have already been impacted by it, safety planning is key.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can you share with us, and hopefully you can, what was the moment or the circumstance that allowed you to break free, you specifically, from a domestic violence situation?
Well, there were some other social factors that kept me going back to that abusive relationship. Okay. You know? And once I addressed that social issue,
right,
I became stronger.
Okay.
And I could think more clearly.
Okay.
And I was surrounded by the right people.
Can you imagine if the pandemic was active at that time, how that might have dictated your exit plan? Would it have had an impact, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I would have been less likely to leave
Right.
at that time had I been in a pandemic.
Wow. Wow.
And at the time that I left, I didn't have a safety plan. I wasn't sure what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I think my faith was stronger than it had ever been before. And I felt confident that the people who God had placed in my life, that they were going to be with me no matter what.
Yeah.
And so I walked out with the clothes on my back because they would hold my stuff hostage, my purse, everything. And I had enough.
Yeah.
You know, one lick too many upside my head, and I had become the abuser because I ended up throwing a big pot of spaghetti sauce, hot spaghetti sauce, on this person with no clothes on. And I was like, I can't go down this path.
Oh, no.
And I left.
They tell me in treatment that recovery begins once you make a decision. And so it sounds like that moment, when you made a decision, you know what, I'm not going to live like this anymore. I can't tolerate living like this anymore. Began your journey in a recovery, because there's a recovery process, I imagine, that you have to undergo when you've left a domestic violence situation and try to reclaim your sense of self, right? Yes. Because domestic violence, I'm sure, stripped you of a lot of characteristics and components that you need to navigate life. Just one thing I could think of maybe is just confidence. I need confidence to navigate life. If I'm not confident, how can I accomplish certain tasks that are in front of me? And so what does the recovery experience look like for someone who's been the victim of domestic violence? I know it's different in varies person to person, but generally what was the most helpful course of recovery?
Well, for one, for providers and family members who are trying to support a survivor of domestic violence in rebuilding their lives, it is very important not to allow your help to be coercive or manipulative or judgmental. We don't want to experience power and control in recovery like we did during abuse. You know, your help should not seek to control me. Collaborate with me. Share the power with me. Don't make me do anything. Don't make me go to a safe house in order to get a protective order.
Right.
Don't make my safe housing be dependent upon me getting a protective order. And a lot of times that's what stops victims from even going through with the process.
Yeah. Now, if we recognize or sense that a loved one, a family member of ours, or a co-worker or a neighbor is being subjected to domestic violence, what would be some of the signs that we might notice? You know, it's my neighbor, she might have a black eye, or you might, how can you pick up if someone you know is being violated in that way?
Well, one of the glaring signs is if you have someone who is generally in touch with you on a regular basis, you guys hang out together, do things together, and that abruptly stops, especially when they get involved with a new person.
Okay.
If you notice that they're not able to go anywhere or do anything absent of this person.
Yep.
You know, those are two very glaring signs. And then one that I've always found present in the relationships that I've had with domestic violence, when they're in a hurry to block you down.
Look at that.
You know, you don't even get a chance to get to know them and they're already in love.
Yep, I get it. Yeah. No,
red flags, red flags, red flags.
Yeah, no, that's important. I hope the audience really took note of some of those things. Listen, in closing, are there resources available right now to anyone who might have a need to depart from a domestic violence situation? And if so, what are some of those resources?
Well, buildingbridgesforyou.org. That's my nonprofit organization. We have some emergency funding right now. So that's Building Bridges, the number 4, letter U.org. The DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence, that's a major resource. The National Network to End Domestic Violence, that's another great resource,
Okay.
as well as loveisrespect.org.
Loveisrespect.org.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I know when people get a chance to view this podcast and listen to my podcast, they might want to reach out to you more directly or make some kind of contact with you and your organization. What's the best way to reach you? What's your contact information?
Well, they can reach me from the contact section of my website.
Okay.
So the website, or they could send an email to info@buildingbridges, the number 4, letter U.org.
Well, I want to salute you, Marsha Woodland, for your commitment to those who are suffering and being victimized through domestic violence. And it's remarkable, your story, I'm sure when you shared with those who you work with specifically, it's empowering. Your transparency is really, again, remarkable, and I'm sure helps move a person from point A to point B. We thank you for joining us today. We thank you for your service, and I encourage people to reach out to Ms. Woodland if you have a loved one who is in need, or if you have a need to get out of a volatile domestic violence situation. Ms. Woodland, we wish you the best. And to our audience, if you want more information about who we are at Prestige, please visit our website at prestigecommunityresources.org. Thank you for joining us today. It has been a pleasure. Until next time, stay safe, stay well.